with Arnold Dean. Hot talk, great guests. Weeknights at 6:15 from WTIC, Hartford.
BBC Radio, Canada's public broadcast.
Try Carter's Little Liver Pill. Good advice.
Good mornings only on KCMO Kansas City. It's 8 o'clock.
When you're tuned to CDS Radio.
This is the DX Central from the Static Podcast.
From Studio B of the North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana.
And welcome, my friends, to this edition of the DX Central from the Static Podcast. My name is Lloyd Van Horn, and so happy to have you with us here today for a special edition of the podcast, actually. This is going to be our first in our interview series, the DX one-on-one interview series. Although in this case, maybe not so much one-on-one. In our DXC one-on-one interviews, we bring you prominent members of the DX community so they can share their expertise, their wit, their wisdom, their thoughts, their memories, and bring it to you so that you can, learn from them. That's what, and for me, I get to learn from them as well. Some of these folks I've been learning from for quite a long time, actually. Now, this interview did air in our season finale of season 5 of DX Central Live in May of 2025 when we wrapped up that season. And it was kind of focused on the FM side of things. I know our last episode, we talked a little bit about FM, a little bit of AM. This is going to be focused mostly on FM DX. And it is with two very, very prominent members of the FM DX community, Nick Langan of New Jersey and Bryce Foster of Massachusetts. And we talk a bit about who those two gentlemen are and what their credentials are, their street cred. And it was a fantastic interview. It lasted way longer than I planned. When we first kind of set out to do the interview, we just kind of kept rolling, and it was awesome. And I love it. And so if you miss it the first time, or if you wanted to kind of go back through and give it a listen, especially if you're on the go, bringing the podcast with you, we appreciate you doing that. This is your opportunity to listen in to our interview with Nick Langan and Bryce Foster from our season finale of season 5 of the DX Central live stream. We'll bring it to you now here on the From the Static Podcast.
Bringing you some of the biggest names in the DX community. This is DXC One-on-One.
All right, let's get to our special guest. You may know them from the VHF DX Podcast. You may know Nick from his articles he writes for Radio World Magazine. If you're following him on Twitter, I know you'll see a lot of his posts up there about some of the articles that he writes. You may know Bryce because he's famous. One of the things he's famous for. Both of them are fantastic DXers, but Bryce was the first person in the continental United States to hear a transatlantic FM reception. Now, we had some folks up in like Newfoundland do it, but I mean, that's like Newfoundland. Like it's like, you threw a rock from Newfoundland, you hit Europe. I'm talking from the continental United States. He was the first one to hear transatlantic FM DX. So we've got ourselves two very awesome DXers joining us now. Let me go over here. Let me unmute both of you and come over here. And Nick, Bryce, welcome to DX Central Live, my friends.
Evening, Lloyd.
Thank you, sir. And I think, Nick, you might still be on mute. I don't hear your mic. You in there? Yeah, Nick, can't hear your microphone yet. Bryce, I'll start with you really fast. Talking about that transatlantic catch, what a thrill that had to be, right? To be doing your usual DX sessions. Did you have any inkling that you might have a shot?
Well, it's funny. It was July of 2021, so of course it was a much different season than the most recent ones. But what actually really set me up for it was it was July 13th, which I think some of the American DXers on this stream might have remembered that day. The day before, actually, the 12th, which I guess I never really think about that much because it was late that evening. There was some double hop to Latin America, specifically Colombia and Venezuela. And I hadn't lived at this location for very long yet, so I wasn't really sure what the potential was to the south or really from a transatlantic perspective. So I had that really cool log the night before, and it sort of spurred my interest to look beyond just the North American, just regular single hop skip. And then, of course, the next morning, I was already pretty vigilant about it because of that little, relatively little opening the night before. And then, sure enough, the transatlantic happened relatively early the next day. And then, the whole day of the 13th was just crazy. Yeah. So
I think I remember that when you got the Colombian, I was in Charleston at the time. We had a pretty decent opening into the Caribbean that time, and I think that's when I had Puerto Rico from Charleston. So I remember there was some stuff happening, and then I think the very next day I was filming a video on how to spot an E-skip opening, and there was Bryce's catch of transatlantic FM DX, and someone actually pointed out in the comment on the video, said, You memorialize this historic moment. So very awesome, man. Nick, are you in there still?
Can you hear me?
There you
are. Beautiful.
Outstanding. So let's talk really quick about the podcast. What spawned the idea? I think it's a fantastic idea to be able to, just pop in your earbuds or have a speaker sitting there listening while you're, DXing or in the shack or whatever you might be doing, to sit there and learn and engage with FM DX. So talk a bit about the podcast and what got you guys started.
Bryce, you want me to take it or?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. We started in 2021, and I think at least part of it was, I think you could even tell by May that was going to be a really good season. And I think there had been, no real formal space to discuss this kind of stuff. And I think I was working with Bryce a little bit for Radioland related endeavors. We'll might touch on that a little bit too. And we both have, radio-related backgrounds also on air. Bryce literally on, real radio stations. I've done stuff for college radio and, board op and all that. So it just sort of aligned something. I wanted to do a podcast. I think Bryce had the same interests. And it just so happened, I think our first or second episode, we detailed Bryce's logs of the Azores, and then some of the other places he had, South America in 2021. So active season, kind of need for it, similar interests. That's the way I see it, Bryce.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add to that is that was the year after COVID, to where I think so many of us were doing, I don't know, live, maybe not streams, but like video chats with each other and sort of getting together in, I don't know, ways that kind of fell off a little bit, I think, after the pandemic wound down. So we had just had a lot of contacts sort of cooped up inside DXing that 2020 and 2021 season. And I had known and chatted with Nick for many years before that, just on and off, but we didn't really get to know each other that well until that COVID year. And I think we just sort of hit it off and figured it'd be fun to do a podcast together, since we both, had the microphone, had the equipment, and a little bit of radio background. So yeah, that's my perspective on how that got started. And it's been a fun project since. We don't do a ton of episodes, not on a rigid schedule. We just like to get together and chat about DX.
Perfect. Guys, I mentioned in the chat, you hearing some echo. Let me know if that gets better. I just turned off an audio source. Let me know if you guys hear a bit less echo now. I think the podcast, I've learned quite a bit. You've had folks like Bill Hepburn on there. Nubish, when he was talking recently about the FMDX web server and some of the projects they're doing with fmdx.org. Talking about like Auroral DX, and Bill talking about Tropo stuff, and just all the ways you guys have covered the different aspects and the different things that are kind of like built in. Because with AMDX is AMDX, right? Like you turn on the radio, and I tell people this all the time. Like you turn on the radio, and any given night you can get DX. FM, you got to work for it a little bit more, right? You got meteor scatter. You have to have the band open, so there's a little bit more work and planning and kind of thinking that has to go into it. And I love the way you guys incorporate some of those different elements of propagation and what's actually happening out and what people are hearing, like Chris Cadlick talking about lake enhancement from Tropo and things like that. So absolutely fascinating stuff you guys have.
Well, thanks. FM DX, has always been, I feel like, both of us, I don't think either of us really do a lot of medium wave. I have started a little bit since I'm in Cape Cod, and it's a pretty good location for all forms of DX. But yeah, it's just a very FM DX, back to the topic is, it's fascinating. It's kind of elusive, and there's so many tricks, especially with new technology, which I think is another part of the podcast. There's always something to talk about, especially with this, open source. You alluded to Nubish and Chef Verhoeven, who we also spoke to, those guys and that Discord community they have. The amount of innovation is crazy compared to the first 50 or 60 years of people doing FMDX. So there's no better time than now to have a ongoing discussion. There's lots to talk about.
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about kind of how you guys got started. And I know, Nick, you alluded to the fact that both of you and Bryce have some broadcasting pedigree, and I have some background in that myself. So I feel like a lot of us that are in the radio hobby have some sort of tie back into broadcasting, either an interest or actual experience in there. But Nick, I'll start with you. How did you actually get started in DXing itself?
Yeah, so growing up in the 90s, I'd have portables from my dad, who I don't want to say he was a shortwave radio DXer, but he would at least collect shortwave radio, Sony portables, the ICF series. That's probably what I got my hands first on. I was probably 5 or 6 at the time, but somehow even back then, FM interested me. Maybe it's because that's what my mom had on the car. So no serious DXing back then. I grew up in Ohio, moved to New Jersey age 10. This would have been 96. Listened to lots of portables. In 2005, I connected a friend of mine, Michael, shout out to him, who is an active DXer in central New Jersey. Our shared interests, something I think, Bryce would also agree, meteorology, weather sort of unites this field. That's how Michael and I connected. And he was already a member of the WTFDA. And so he convinced me to invest in an APS 13. So I kind of went from nothing to the 13 element Yagi, which I still have today. It's still my, absolute rock. It survived a move. And so, when I heard, I was sort of always under the impression here in New Jersey, coastal tropo from Cape Cod to Virginia, that was the extent on portables. And I think people would have this perception. Summer mornings, you hear it when the temperatures are warming up and there are inversions. And I really wasn't too familiar with E-skip. It was not until I, started seriously, and I'll, specifically cite an opening in 2006, an E-skip opening, June 10th. I heard 92.9 KRWN, Farmington, New Mexico, which is now on 92.5. It has since moved. I heard it on the flight that I wrote about in Radio World, so coming full circle. But that was a double hop at over 1,800 miles. So that sort of hooked me. At that point, it's, can you top this, basically. And so, I feel like I've had a lot of fun in what will now be somehow my 20th year doing this. And well, it is, I'm sure DXing, I'm sure you hear from folks, the band makes it tough. The FM band, that is. But I think in so many ways, Bryce was talking about it with the open source community. I feel like this is the best time to do this. Like all these tools, what you've shown over this series, it's SDRs, diversity mode. I'd love to touch on. It's a pretty good time to be an FM DXer. So that's kind of my path to this. So.
It really is. Yeah, outstanding. It's amazing how there are so many shared experiences amongst DXers. Meteorology, geography always seems to be in that list as well, and just a general electronics interest. Bryce, same question for you, my friend.
Yeah, DXing, I've been doing it since I was 13. So I got a Bose wave radio from my grandparents back in that time, which that would have been, right around the turn of the millennium. I was born in 1990. So yeah, like 2002, 2003, I got this radio, and I was going through a music phase at that point as a young teenager, listening to country. And the only country station near LA where I grew up went off the air or changed formats. So it was 93.9 KZLA, which was, line of sight. I lived within line of sight of Mount Wilson, unfortunately, for attempting to DX in Southern California at the time. And we had a range of hills to our east, and the only other country station that was on the air at that time is, I believe it still is a country station, 95.1 KFRG. They go by K-Frog. And there was a big giant hill right to the east of our house in between us and that station. So I would try to listen, and I would be, standing on one foot on my bed, trying to mount the antenna that came with the Bose wave radio in just the right position so I could pick this thing up. And I would notice on like warm evenings, it would come in better. And I was so confused because I thought I got my antenna to just the right spot, and the signal kept changing. And at that point, it was like the early internet. I think we had just gotten DSL. And I, went to the den where our family computer was and started like trying to figure out why radio signals change from day to night. And I learned about this DX. But of course, I mentioned the hill to the east of our house. I've learned a lot about terrain, since that's kind of how my DX started. So I tried so hard. I had my dad call and order the Weingard 10-element antenna, which was, I think, one of the better antennas at the time from Stark Electronics, which was, I think they went out of business a few years ago, but I feel like a lot of people bought antennas from that outlet, and they were in Michigan. Got that antenna shipped across the country and went with my dad on the roof and set it up and tried for DX, and had almost no luck because we just pointed straight into this hill that would, in Southern California, east is pretty much the main direction. And then after about a year of trying, I witnessed a really huge E-skip opening to the south, which was a terrain clear direction for us down to Mexico. And so DX was just super elusive, and I got really hooked, and I tried. And it wasn't until I really moved away and went to college, I on and off did FM DXing, despite this very challenging DX location, and then moved to Tennessee to go to college when I was 18. And then I was really hooked at that point because, Tennessee in 2008, near Nashville, I had a second floor apartment, put a little dipole in the window and logged, I think 1,500 stations from my apartment there. It was such a great location at that time. So after that, I started my little DX website and just have been hooked ever since.
Awesome. Speaking of, I know some of you guys mentioned in the chat as well, Bryce is also famous for his SDR console tutorial videos, which Man, I have been using console for years, since I guess 2018. And when you put that series out, I learned a lot just from. I was like, "Holy crap! I never realized. I never knew that." Like the navigator in the waterfall navigator to be able to kind of go through the waterfall, the data file analyzer for meteor scatter. So if you have not checked out Bryce's videos on SDR console, and you're interested in FM DXing, even if you're not, if you're AM or FM, there's some good stuff in there. Go check them out. You're going to learn a lot. Also, some questions also in the chat here, and you guys definitely keep those coming in, and I'll cross-check with what I've got here. We'll make sure we cover as much as we can here today. Let's talk about some of the techniques that you use to spot an opening, or when you sit down to DX. What's your process that you use for that? And this kind of translates into a tip that our friend Barry asked. If you had like one tip to give to a DXer, what might it be? So kind of correlate that. So what's your process, and what do you think might be like a technique that you use that gives you that little extra edge to be able to spot those openings again in there in DX? Nick, I'll start with you.
So this is easier said than done. It is 2025, and I know if you're DXing in a metro area, open channels might be a foreign concept. I am very sympathetic to that. But I would try to identify probably lower in the band where the MUF is likelier to at least start. Identify 2 or 3 key channels that maybe it's a semi-local. Maybe it's just, you can position your TEF or Quadosin in a certain angle where you can null a local. The 2 or 3 best channels, and just try to focus on that. And this is specific to Sporadic E. It could impact Tropo as well. I think for somebody starting new, that way, sometimes I feel like that the biggest mistake I see are newer DXers trying to use channels, wondering why they're not hearing DX, when chances are, whether it's an HD radio sideband or whether it's a semi-local, it's not going to overcome it. So start with a baseline of channels. What do I use? To an extent, there are some channels I know, depending on direction. Now, this is also contingent on having a directional Yagi that specific to E-skip. That I rely upon. And what helps me tremendously, I don't think I'm breaking any ground. I know you've mentioned it. I know it can be controversial in some circles, but I do think the FT8 spots specific to E-skip, if they are plentiful, if there's just a handful, you could probably throw them out. It's probably not going to correlate with MUF rising to the FM band. But if, whatever you use, PSK, DX maps, whatever it might be, if that really starts to populate, that's probably my first alert, and or the FM list alerts. I think, this is something 5 years ago would not have been reliable just because of sample size issues. And now we're at the point in 2025, at least in my neck of the woods in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, where I think there's been a few times where somebody spotting on FM list causes me to then look at my rabbit ears autologger, or vice versa. You've talked about rabbit ears enough that, so there's a few ways. I still think 6 meters is great. I wish I had a 6 meters set up myself, or FT8, but, I'll look at the maps, FM list alerts, and then the rabbit ears autologger, combination of the 3. So those are some things, I personally rely on.
Awesome. I mean, it's amazing that even with some of the differences now on 6 meters, like 20 years ago, of a spot of voice, probably voice contacts on 6 meters was one thing. Now with FT8, it's super weak mode, so there's just so much more of it now because everyone's getting in there. It really can be that kind of like the way I kind of liken it is, you have your local weather station, you know, they'll say things like, you know, you're in a severe thunderstorm, watch, right? Or tornado, watch. Like, it's just giving you an idea that conditions are right, that maybe FM is going to be propagating here for you soon. So it doesn't mean you're going to get that storm. Maybe the conditions are going to come together for you. Bryce, same question.
So I think Nick laid a pretty good baseline of what my recommendations would be to a new DXer. So I guess I'll add a couple little, like, maybe more advanced tips. I mean, first of all, if this new DXer were using traditional kind of equipment like a TEF, I mean, which is hardly traditional, but, you know, a one channel at a time tuner and not sitting and watching a waterfall of an SDR, I would say my number one piece of advice would be don't do it inside your house. In 2025, FM, you won't notice, but there's like a lot of noise, a lot of junk that's just going to make it incredibly hard to DX indoors, in my opinion. So if you have the ability to get out of the house, I mean, I guess getting next to a window is fine if you're indoors, but take your TEF or portable radio, or even if you have a setup that can be made portable, and, you know, get 100 feet into your backyard or go on a walk or something and get out into open space. Use your car radio. You'd be surprised at, I think, how much this quiet noise that comes from all the modern electronics and gizmos and gadgets in your house, how much noise it can create on the FM band. And then my next tip would be, I don't think, unless you're there in Goldfield, Nevada with Randy DXing, I think there's, even in a place like where I live, where there are some open or kind of open channels, there's always going to be a bunch of semi-locals or aircraft scatter or tropo pests that are going to be floating in and out of even a good DX channel. So learning those stations and how they sound, if you can pick up a little bit of audiophile kind of skills to tell, does the station sound a little bit muddy? Does it have some digital artifacts? Do they have really good processing? Is it loud? Is it quiet? That way, when you're listening to your DX channels, you can kind of quickly identify, and then obviously the formats of those stations, to where you can just have a pretty good hunch that, you know, if I'm 98.7 would be one of my good open channels. And actually it's a bad example because there's been a bunch of format changes, but, you know, I would know that there's 2 or 3 stations in my DX direction of west where I'm typically listening in Massachusetts. And I'm so familiar with those 3 stations and how they sound that I know when there's something more exotic. You know, if I hear something that's not one of those 3 formats, or a station that sounds kind of weird, it raises the antenna, no pun intended, in your head, saying this is probably DX and not just my tropo pest for the 1000th time. Because that's always the biggest head fake and the biggest waste of time in DXing, when you're listening for an ID of some great DX you think you have, and then it's, you know, the same pest from 150 miles away again. So there you go.
It's something that we preach, and the folks in the chat, you know, that band scan. I am an advocate of an annual band scan because of format changes and call letter changes and stations changing frequency and things like that. That annual band scan, just to refamiliarize yourself with the band before the DX season starts, during those dead band conditions in February or January or March. It's so critical, because it does set you up for success once the DX does come in. You go, wait a minute, that's something I'm not used to. And this year when I did mine, I actually did I have a spreadsheet that I keep of every frequency, what station I hear, their signal level, everything else. This year, for the first time, I actually noted the signal level of even my open frequencies, so that I could say, okay, normally it's a negative 110 dBm, but right now I'm at a negative 95. So something's there. It may not be super strong, it hadn't really come in yet, but something's there I might want to kind of keep an eye on. So love hearing that you guys kind of have the same approach here of just knowing your band is so important. Best DX catch ever. And then we're going to talk about some of the projects you guys are doing here. Best DX catch ever. Someone was talking about distance, but just best DX catch you've ever gotten. Nick?
It's funny. I am eSkip is great. Who doesn't love eSkip, who's logged into this chat right now? I think, but we've talked about this on the podcast a couple of times. I do love the Tropo potato.
Team Tropo.
I literally, in the same podcast, Bryce is probably like, I interchange it. Like I have no consistency. Regardless, I get a kick out of Tropo openings. It's not as easy to come by here in the northern mid-Atlantic, here on the East Coast, but I absolutely love them. I would say probably it's certainly not even for distance. It is not not the farthest Tropo log I've had, but I had 104.3 Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, up there, right above the UP of Michigan, during the time of the year I love, like mid-September, when openings across the Appalachians into the Great Lakes are possible from the coastal plain. And that's, that is a rugged path. DXers for decades would tell you it doesn't always happen. And the reason why I mention it, because I think it comes into a technique that has revived my DXing. It would not have been possible. Not only I'm dog sitting my aunt's dog, and then my dog Judy luckily is sleeping. So if you hear that, that's my studio audience. But Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and the reason why I was able to hear it was the diversity mode via the RSP Duo, which totally filtered out the HD radio sideband from 104.5 WRFF in Philadelphia. And diversity mode not only has opened up channels that would not be DXable. I feel like there's been circumstances where, and this is I'm the podcast that we haven't released yet. We'll release soon. I've got to do it. Talks about using diversity mode to your advantage a little bit, because you could actually tweak it to. It's used. The ideal use case for diversity mode is to strengthen signals. So I feel like there's been, particularly with inland Tropo stations, that it has revealed that I wouldn't have been looking for. So Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is about 680 miles to my northwest, on September 19th, 2022. It's not the farthest, but it was a full RDS signal. I have it on my YouTube, WNJL, where my smooth jazz radio air checks do a lot better than any of my FM DX clips. I'm a big smooth jazz guy also. So that would be my number one.
Awesome. Bryce?
I'm living for Nick's studio audience. I see her in the camera there.
That's Judy. That's Judy. She has witnessed many skip openings. And she, like a good soldier, she waits for her walks while I, take forever to wait for the last. This is another thing for newbies that might be in the audience. Like you gotta milk every second of the opening possible, and whether it's a significant other, whether in this case for me it's Judy. She is a good soldier, let me tell you.
Okay, sorry. I just had to get that in there. So I'm going to go with my gut, because I actually agree with Nick. I really, really love Tropo, and I'm on team Tropo. It's not Tropo, IMO. So I have had some really, really neat catches also using the diversity mode feature, but I'm going to go with that same 2021 skip season with all the incredible transatlantic catches, which were all very fun. And I hate to not include one of them as my favorite, but my gut was station 93.9 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is down there deep, deep in the Caribbean. I don't know, a few countries north of like Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada. It was just such a cool, like hyper local kind of content. with that classic Caribbean accent. And I have DX'd from Puerto Rico quite a bit and have always really, really had fun with some of the different little Caribbean islands off to the southeast of Puerto Rico. So that was one of those incredible days. I want to say it might have been July 13th, but I dug that out. Like probably a year later, doing an IQ review recording, just trying to get every log out of one of those spectacular DX days. Dug that out, got like a perfect ID, and I don't think anybody had ever logged that on FM list before. It's not a particularly high power station, just a super fun catch. Some of those randomly stick with you, and that was one of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that 2021 season. I'll never forget that. That was an amazing year, especially in July when I felt like you couldn't keep up. Like every day you're like, okay, I got to make some room on my hard drive before the next opening.
Yeah,
and then
the period,
the next opening.
The 13th, it was exhausting. I remember feeling that way. Yep.
So we talked about the podcast and what you guys do with that. They have guests that join in. They talk about the different topics. And I'm looking forward to the diversity discussion. I've just started to kind of dabble my toes in that with my own RSP Duo here. I just swapped out one of my antennas that's paired with that. Moved my Stereo Probe 9 from my ELAD FDMS 3 to the RSP Duo. That's now paired with a Winegard HD 6010 that's at 62 feet up into a tree. So looking forward to seeing how that goes this year. Also, shout out for AirSpy and the co-channel canceller. I haven't done a ton of FM side. I've done a lot of the AM stuff. But I am wanting to do some FM stuff because, we are famous down here for our Gulf Tropo. And I definitely feel like there's been some opportunities that I've missed to log some stations where if I could just knock down my semi-local or my local that's not like crazy strong, just enough to let that FM capture overtake and get that DX in there, I feel like there's some opportunities for me there. So I want to try that out this year. Also,
how close to New Orleans are you, Lloyd?
29 miles as a crow flies, right across Lake Pontchartrain, right at the front of the causeway, the top of the causeway.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you're probably clean for the RSP Duo, but the one thing I'd say for anybody listening that's interested in diversity, because you've heard about it, one disclaimer I would give is that the RSP Duo, I've always had environments with really strong signals nearby. It is not the best at handling really strong local signals. You'll really have to play with the gain, and if you're pointed at it, it's just, that's the one downside. The HF Plus is a brick. It can handle your strongest flamethrower nearby. So the co-channel canceller is, not as good as diversity in my opinion, just because it's software versus hardware. But if you have strong signals nearby, that's an incredible technology. It doesn't need two antennas, and it can handle any strong signals you throw at it.
Yeah, that AirSpy. I mean, you can almost be literally sitting right next to a flamethrower tower, and it's not going to overload. It's really, really bulletproof. So let's talk about some of the other projects you guys also have worked on. So starting with Nick. Radio World magazine. Nick writes for Radio World. He recently did an article about DXing from an airplane using the TEF 6686 portable and some of the catches that he was getting. So talk a bit about your writing that you do there for Radio World and how a DXer might find some benefit.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I started full time there in December, which is super exciting. You wake up every day and you get to write about radio. Like what that's for somebody like me, it's a pretty good deal. I wouldn't say it was my first thought, but again, why do I get excited about this? I'd be lying if I said it's necessarily because of the content on radio day to day. We all know there are pluses and minuses there, but it's propagation, it's signals, it's equipment too. And the beauty is Radio World writes a whole bunch about transmitting equipment, processors, antennas. But we also, I try to pick our spots, but we do have a lot of folks who enjoy things from a hobbyist perspective. So I now have this column I call Nick's Signal Spot that runs every other week. And, I can tell you for sure as we get into eSkip season, there will definitely be eSkip related articles. I think what sort of fueled this, I feel like you probably talked about it, Lloyd, or at least it happening. There was an incredible late night eSkip opening back in January that blew away anything I heard in 2024, which was, we won't waste energy on it. But again, maybe when we talk about your data, but that was a, dreadful season. But the late night of January 14th, 2025, phenomenal opening. So I wrote a story about it, and our editor-in-chief, Paul McLean, he really liked it. People seemed to like it. I tied it into Pat Dyer's data of like winter and then the neural pattern to eSkip and how sometimes there is precedent in the winter for late night eSkip. So this was not like an unheard of thing. So now I hope to sort of make it a regular feature. And so at the beginning of the month, I got to go to the NAB show to cover it for Radio World, as well as our sister publication, which is the NAB Show Daily. And so I flew Philly to Las Vegas, and about halfway through, I decided, I brought the TEF, and I've, as probably folks in the audience, I've DX'd with the little AudioVox portable, Walkmans. Actually, I have a YouTube video on my feed. I brought an RTL SDR dongle. I flew from Newark to London in 2014. And actually, I was watching that as a result of doing this article. And actually, it might be interesting. Folks might want to check it out. Anyway, so I wrote this article about what I heard flying above Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, some signals from New Jersey that we hear from on eSkip all the time. And the TEF, just with its RDS, like it brought plain DXing to a whole new level. It was incredible. I was hearing translators in Southern Colorado, strong translators with, wicked high height above average terrain, just being, in the Rockies there. But still, translators on an airplane. So it was really cool. And I got a lot of good feedback from that. Also a couple, actually is about, can you use a radio on an airplane? And, officially you should check with your airline. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. That is, there's no official regulation on the books. It's up to the airline. So I want to be clear on that. But it was really cool. And so, I get to write about stories all, probably a couple every day. There's so many regulatory things going on right now. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, I won't get into all that and bore the audience. But there are often stories that impact DXing from a regulatory RDS, with all the radio industry sort of focused on the importance of metadata and gotta look good in the dashboard. How are you going to do that? Either HD radio or having proper RDS. So, the one thing I would say to everybody in the audience, Bryce and I talk about this a little bit on our next podcast. If there's a station in your market, in your neck of the woods, not using RDS, I would venture just with, as much of an emphasis as this is in the industry right now, to look good in the modern dashboard, RDS with PI data, or specifically PS data, scrolling song titles, or using it as a revenue stream for currently playing advertisements. That was a focal point. That was a focal point at NEB. Of course, so was AI, but we won't get into that here. So to get to write about these stories every day is really awesome. So that's some of what I'm doing at Radio World right now.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is that there is obviously some directly DX related content, but for the things that are more industry related and industry centric, it does give DXers insight into kind of the behind the scenes of what we experience when we hear these stations, what's going on into some of that. Like you mentioned with RDS, I heard there was a proposal now for them to, at least in the non-commercial, there was a proposal to remove the ID requirement. Don't like that from a DX standpoint. Don't like
that's obviously there's so many, there is an open call by the FCC. It's essentially in no uncertain terms, a deregulation initiative. What rules do we have on the books that we can get rid of that is unnecessary, holding back broadcast from advancing forward in 2025. So they are getting proposals of all shapes and forms. I just wrote an article about a response to virtualizing EAS, putting EAS as a software, because until this point, every station that runs EAS, and it's a requirement, you have to have some sort of EAS decoder at the station. And so, EAS as software sounds like a great idea. Well, who's going to regulate that? There's all sorts of things related to cybersecurity. So, but there's also, we did a story on, I believe it was Geo Broadcast Solutions that proposed, well, they're doing this in other places, Europe, the idea of a distributed transmission system. Maybe we don't need a primary transmitter site anymore. Maybe we could just string together single frequency networks or, essentially boosters, and just, save on energy costs and serve a market that way. Which that also drew, a lot of ire. So it's quite a time to be alive. So you will see proposals like that, whether or not these are going to get through. I would say a large chunk aren't. But things also happen on a daily basis now that would have surprised us and probably don't. So it's interesting. But Radio World tries to stay on top of that. I'll plug also our Smart Brief newsletter, which is free. You can sign up, get in your inbox every day, and it has some of our stories. Our team works really hard. So plug that as well.
Awesome. And the website is.
Just radioworld.com. We still do 2 print issues a month, 26 issues a year, but all the content on the website is free. We have ebooks. Something, I think a lot of DXers like to check out, studios, transmitter sites. We have a really cool ebook from January. It's literally called Amazing Radio Studios, that takes you inside like what the setups in Big Marcus, Cumulus in DC, K-Love's studios, they just moved to Tennessee. Franklin, I believe, Bryce's old stomping grounds. We have a big profile of them in that ebook. They're all free. You can download. So I think, is it quite the same in the way it was as far as, you hear something cool, you want to find out about it, in some ways, no, but also like the only way, I think if you talk with anybody in the industry that's being serious, the only way that there will, that this will continue onward, like the localism element has to be preserved somehow. So it's cool to be able to portray that. And I feel like in, many ways we get to do that. So.
Now, you had mentioned the Radioland app, and I do want to talk about this. This is a project that actually brought you two together, where Bryce was helping with the coding. So we have the app here, and so you can get this from. I know that I'm using mine on the iOS App Store. It's also on Android. And what this basically does is it gives you for my current location, I can sit here and I can load a list of stations that I should be able to receive from my local area. And it gives me information on things like signal strength, formatting, and things like that. So it's right now pulling through and loading up all my stations here in the Mandeville area. And it's going to basically make suggestions on here's what we think you might be able to hear, and gives you like signal strength and things like that. So talk a bit about the app, what brought this about, and kind of the work that you guys put into making it happen.
I think it dates back, it comes full circle, like doing trips in the 90s as a kid. All my family is from Jersey, grew up in Ohio, as I mentioned, but we would come back to New Jersey a bunch of times a year before we eventually moved back to New Jersey. And so in the car, be tuning around, and there was it was a lot harder back then to have any idea what you were hearing on the road. And that sort of stuck with me. There was, obviously there was the M Street Journal. I couldn't afford that back then. There was a guide by a guy in the Boston area, and I picked it up. I'll never forget. I believe it was the summer of '95. So it was probably like 8, 9. This is how what 9-year-old is thinking about things like this. I picked up a book. It was called The Essential Radio Guide from a bookstore in the Copley Square Mall in Boston. I think the author was from Plymouth. And it listed stations by market for more of like a travel use case. You're headed to San Antonio. Here are the stations. Here's a little signal strength. Here's the format. Thought it was really cool. So fast forward, 24 years, I had the opportunity to finish my studies, older in life than a normal college student at Villanova, and studying for my master's. I got to undertake a software project for basically 2 semesters. You do anything you want. And I wanted to do like this mobile app that, based on your location, pretty simple concept. What stations could you hear? But try to make it accurately with whatever tools are available. So there were a couple of folks. There was Trip Mark from Rabbit Ears, who you probably shouted out. Rabbit Ears, the WLogger, all the time. Mark is the owner of the site. His day job, I think he's at liberty to say this. He works for the FCC, and so it was Bryce who suggested, because early on, and this was 2021, before the skip season, took off like a rocket, Bryce suggested, why don't you reach out to Trip Mark, see how he kind of does it with Rabbit Ears, because if anybody who TV DX is or just, looks for TV signals, he's got this signal search map feature on Rabbit Ears, which calculates based on your location what digital TV signals you could pick up, receive, reliably decode. And it does kind of exactly what I wanted to do with FM. So I pitched it to Mark. And so he steered me toward an application the FCC has, because the FCC still uses the Longley-Rice propagation model. It dates back to the 60s, and it's rock solid. It takes into account terrain differences between the receiver and the transmitter. So I won't get too deep into the weeds. I had, some coding knowledge, and Bryce definitely does. You've talked about WLogger. Bryce wrote that. Sort of, using some of the tools he developed for an API to look up stations. And I always wanted to build a mobile app. So I used a software development kit called Flutter. And in about 6 months for my graduate thesis, wrote this. And so tried to put together a decent looking user interface. By the winter of 2022, released it. Didn't quite know how it was going to do. And I feel like, I hope and feel like it can aid DXers. You search for a location or you scroll on a map to a location station you might be hearing and see these signals of the particular market. And the one group of folks I hear from a lot who seem to like it are broadcast engineers who, take it around if they're trying to see why a station is interfering, or why an LPFM that seems to be overpowered, what their Longley-Rice coverage overlay looks like, because they're built into every station that's listed in the U.S. And I just added Canada at the beginning of 2025, so Canadian stations. So you get a feel for the coverage area. You get a feel of the formats from the WTFDA database. A huge shout out. And there's one other tool I just added earlier this year. Every time you load the app, first load, beginning of the day, it just does a simple, comparison, the last day, the Radioland database to today. And I find that helpful. This is another thing Bryce and I talked about on the podcast. There's been a sneaky amount of stations filing for silent special transmitting authorities with the FCC, specifically FM translators that relay AM stations. Some companies in 2025, specifically I think Town Square and Cumulus, have identified areas where not revenue producing sources, and so anytime a station files for a silent STA the next day in Radioland, it shows up in the deleted column. Now, I wouldn't take that to bank. Don't necessarily run on social media and say, KRB is off the air, and so we're just presenting the data as is. But a potential helpful DX tool, and getting to your point, Lloyd, do a band scan. There are a few high-profile stations. Bryce and I talked about 94.9 KOLI, Electra, Texas. That's in the Wichita Falls market. They filed. They're silent. I don't think they're coming back. And they're not even looking to put it on the market. At least right now, I believe it's Cumulus who owns them. Maybe it's Town Square. So there's a few, and I'm not saying that this is a great thing. We do need targets, but that has been happening, and that's another use case where Radioland might be able to come in handy. So it was a thrill to build something like this that has some remote usefulness, and as I can, trying to add things to it. The next stop, Lloyd, is medium wave stations, and I don't think it's that far away. So that's awesome. That's something I'm actively working on. So.
I was actually using the app recently as part of my my use of some of the FM DX web servers that are on the fmdx.org, using that app to help to kind of set my location as wherever that web server is. And then being able to kind of see that station list, right? Did it for your area. I was looking for some E-skip the other day that was looking like maybe in the Northeast there was going to be something happening.
I saw you logged on. I saw you, that's, hey, look, that's what it's there for.
That's right.
What it's there for.
Was looking to see if there was anything going on in New Jersey. Yeah.
I also I know he's in the chat, Kyle DXer, a shout out to Kyle up there in Moses Lake. His, unbelievable HD radio directory fuels Radioland's HD2, HD3, HD4, the HD icon. I was able to import that in as a data source. And so, because, when I first wrote it, it was not pulling in HD subchannels. Thanks to his meticulous efforts, it has that. So I see him in the chat. Definitely deserves a shout out. So
that's awesome. You mentioned WLogger, and I've made my case here that obviously I'm a big proponent of people logging to FM lists, because that feeds things like the maps, e-alerts that a lot of us rely on to kind of have that heads up about an e-opening. But I'm also very much an advocate of let's not limit ourselves as DXers and the tools that we use. Now, I know a lot of times what happens is a DXer finds their thing, and that's what they kind of run with and kind of stick with. But what I am saying is open it up and let's make sure we have our toolbox filled with as many different resources as possible, because there have been many times during an opening when I'm logged in, even if I'm not like interacting with WLogger, I'll have WLogger up and I'm seeing the conversations that are happening, and that helps guide me to what I am understanding of what's happening with the opening. So talk a bit about WLogger, Bryce. You know, kind of the impetus behind, I know you did a big redesign. It was last year, I think. And it's very much a social, interactive way to share what we're hearing right now. And for people to, and this is the part that, you know, places like FM List don't have, is that commentary about, okay, here's what I'm seeing in the opening. Looks like it's starting to die out a little bit, or, oh, no, let me just back up again. Talk a bit about some of the elements you've put into WLogger and what makes it so helpful.
Well, it's been an interesting project, and, you know, it really is trying to just find a home for people online that liked that legacy. I think we, at least people who have been DXing FM for more than 5 or 6 years, I'm sure we all started at some point. I think maybe my homepage on my browser was the TV FM skip log. You know, RIP, major RIP to that.
DX world.
DX world. It was my go-to. I would just, to make sure that the internet was on, I would refresh the TV FM skip log. And it was so sad when it went off the air, or I say off the air, went off the internet. Yeah. And at that point, late in the life of TV FM skip log, there were 2 bulletin boards kind of before Slack and Discord and this live stream. And even, I think FM List was around, but it really didn't get a lot of adoption up until, you know, up in the 2010s, the previous decade. So the other bulletin board in the mix was this WTFDA WLogger. I don't even know what it was called. It was hosted on something called VCI, which was like someone's ISP, one of the Ed Phelps, I believe, who was a member of WTFDA. Anyway, it was on its last legs sometime around 2020. I think there was like an internet company that was hosting it, and the code was so old and the server was going to be turned off. And at the time, I think I had taught myself how to program in the Python programming language, and I was just kind of looking for like a real world project to just sort of hone my coding skills, having a day job that didn't actually require programming. And it was just like a challenge I had for myself to learn how to code. So I did that and a couple other projects. And, you know, that probably has been my longest lasting project. Went online in 2019 or 2020. I want to say 2020. And pretty soon after the bulletin board that WTFDA was using had kicked the bucket. So it was not really touched for several years, and I had gotten a lot of requests over that period of things to add, bugs, glitches, things that weren't working. The archive was missing the 31st day of the month for a long time, you know. It was something that I didn't really have a lot of time to maintain. So last year I did a push and just kind of did an update. I think it has some pretty cool features now. Yeah. There's some bugs still in the system. Like I have to hit the FCC's API for TV, which they promptly like broke and never fixed like shortly after I released the update of the app. But for the most part, it works pretty well. And, you know, I love using the find button for FM and getting the mileage and degrees and watts and stuff like that, because I think we were all typing it into the old school bulletin board sort of format. So it's been a cool tool. I don't spend a whole lot of time maintaining it, and I really just did it so that WTFDA didn't lose their chat board. I personally sometimes don't even check it very much. I don't even keep a logbook, nor am I always a super active DXer. So I have a very minimalist footprint. You know, I log everything on FM List, which is my only real form of logging. And WLogger is sort of a community service to me that I'm happy people use. And those people who love those chat logs, I mean, it's very simple. There's, you know, it doesn't spy on you. There's no social media. It's just an old school basic web bulletin board that I built from scratch. So
yeah, and that's one of the things I love, the simplicity of it, and I do love the social interaction that you can have with DXers in real time, right during the event, right? So there's so many. I've mentioned this before. There are so many different places that DXers will congregate, especially FM DX during an opening. You've got people on this FM DX group on Facebook. You got people on Twitter. You've got folks on Slack. You've got folks over here. Like having a nice place that you can go talk to like-minded people. I love having that in conjunction with a logging feature. So it's not just like, hey guys, I'm hearing, and then I have to type all the stuff out that I'm hearing. It's, hey guys, I'm hearing this. And then you search for the call letters and boom, there it is. That is absolutely fantastic. And you can get a lot of great information about the nature of the opening by just kind of seeing what other folks in other locations are seeing real time. So
the archives too are great. If you hit the archives button and you even want it more simple, you can go back and look at many years, including that old bulletin board that I was able to archive. So
awesome! That
old WTFDA bulletin board goes back to 2013. It's all available in that logger. So it's a great place to kind of look back at history as well in a very, very simple way.
Awesome. And we did a video here as part of our getting ready for the upcoming FM DX season video series on WLogger, on WTFDA. So make sure those of you watching, as you get ready for this e-skip season, make sure you go check those out, and walks you through how to use the WLogger and the WTFDA station database, which is an absolutely required resource to have in your toolbox for FM DX season. Even if you're using places like FM List, I am cross-checking between both of them constantly. So definitely make sure that you're familiar with that and how to navigate through that. All right, talking about FM List, I think this is a good time for us to talk a bit about the data analysis, and I want to talk about this in the context with you guys to kind of get your take on just the overall sporadic E, some of the theories that are out there. I know you guys have touched on this before on the podcast, some of the theories that are out there about mechanisms that create sporadic E. We are now going to put out I'm going to go ahead and link this here in the chat. This is our 8 years of data from fmlist.org for North American sporadic E openings. This is based off of, again, fmlist.org data. DXer submitting logs. We did a kind of a synopsis last year about midway through the season and just kind of saying, okay, maybe this season's not going to be so great. So we were kind of comparing that to previous years. Well, this year we've actually gone in, we've added the rest of 2024, and we have expanded the analysis. So first off, let's get your thoughts on, from your standpoint, from the research that you've done, from talking to different DXers, from what you have kind of found. Nick, we'll start with you first. Sporadic E. There's a lot of people who say, oh, it's solar this or it's meteor that. What do you think?
I mean, the probably most straightforward answer is we really don't know. I do think there's I think you'd be crazy to say there isn't some sort of solar link just based on the way last season seemed to go. I'll never forget, like, May actually started off kind of decent. I think on May 8th, we had a pretty decent opening here in the Northeast Mid-Atlantic to the Gulf Coast. And I remember some of us saying, wow, what a great start. This is, things are looking up. Then on May 10th, people might recall, we had a spectacular Northern Lights auroral event. People all over the Northeast, it wasn't quite as pronounced as the one in November. I think it was November. But it sort of kicked off this activity of aurora in the sky and northern lights and daily looking at, the K index. We had Bill Hepburn on last May to talk about it right afterward. I was at Bryce's house. And so I will never forget. It was actually October for that second one. Right after that, things just seemed to shut off. And it was so, one of our VHF DX podcast listeners in the UK, Tim, I think it was, he described it as ionospheric constipation. And I don't think there was any more apt way to describe the openings that did make FM. So, and, just to further the case, and again, this is nothing terribly scientific. The last similar solar cycle, I remember I had seen cited. It's never a good thing when you first see something on X, on social media, but I do think there was merit to it. Happened to be 2002, where one of the indices was similar. I'm identifying it a little bit. 2002, Bryce and I talked about on the last podcast, was Pat Dyer, WA5IYX, his worst e-skip season tracking since the early 70s in San Antonio. The activity was horrendous. To spin it to a positive, the next year saw an excellent bounce back. I believe the best of the 2000s that Pat Dyer charted. Maybe to the point, Lloyd, of the Spectrum Monitor, talking about the, epic HF 6 meter season we're about to see. Maybe that sort of goes hand in hand. So I'd be lying if I said I knew for sure. I know solar winds. I know there's some DXers in the UK that think there's a jet stream correlation very significantly. There's different theories. I do think it was curious how those northern lights kicked in last May, and it never was quite the same. And there were multiple opportunities for northern lights, down to latitudes we hadn't seen in years last year. So it's a bit of a mystery. I do think it's extremely valuable to have past data. Pat Dyer's set, but now what you've put together with all the contributions to FM list, Bryce and I had to check it out, had a chance to check it out before the podcast. It looks very exciting. It's
having the opportunity to provide context was very, very exciting for me, because that's what I basically did. As I said, I'm going to try to answer all the questions, as many of the questions that I have about what happens in a sporadic E season, right? So to your point, May 8th, 2024, 92 logs on that day across North America, and then nothing for 3 days. Now, a 3-day span of no activity in May, that's not unheard of. Especially,
not unusual.
Yeah, especially not in the early part of the month. But then after that, it was like 7 here, 19 there, and it just never really kind of got its feet. And one of the things that we talk about in the analysis, and I'll be getting into a bit later, when we kind of dive into it, is that I've kind of broken in when we look at the number of logs on a given day in a given year. So May 8th of 2024, May 31st of 2023, which was an amazing year opening that day. I've kind of broken them into categories. So you have like an isolated opening where just like a couple of people are getting in on the action. There's not a whole lot of activity. There's more of and that's like 100 logs or less for the day. A moderate activity day, like 100 to 500 logs. More widespread, 500 to 1,000, and then extreme, which is like those big thousands. The ones you really kind of hang your hat on and kind of feel like, okay, we had a good year, are the widespreads, and you want to sprinkle a couple of extremes in there, like 2 or 3 in the season. We had no extremes last year. We had one widespread event. It was June 22nd. It was 688 logs. Every other day for the rest of the year was under 500 logs. And that tells you a lot about the quality of what that season actually turned out. So, Bryce, your thoughts on the mechanics behind the ionosphere and what gets it going?
Well, is it late enough to say like Russians, DARPA, UFOs?
And there goes my monetization. No, just kidding.
I don't know. I'm pretty much in the same camp as Nick. I think there's a strange coincidence to peaks of solar cycles or near peaks and bad years of E-skip. So it seems like some solar activity is good, but not too much. And, I don't know. I think the mystery is what makes it fun. So I'm not really one of those that tries to come up with a theory, and everyone I have heard who has a confident theory, I'm just heavy dose of salt. I mean, I'm just fine with it being a mystery.
You can poke a lot of holes in a lot of the theories, right? Like there's the meteor theory. Then why does the biggest meteor shower of the year coincide with the death of E-skip season? Right?
You know what? The meteor theory is the only one. I mean, you said it. So I don't think it's a systemic cause of E-skip, but I have witnessed too many highly coincidental meteor scatter, especially living at this location where I am now, which I am thankful that I have a few open frequencies, and I point southwest into a nature preserve, so it's pretty low noise floor. I've had a lot of really great meteor scatter activity here, and I have noticed a distinct connection between E-skip openings that are kind of right on the verge of having it together and getting into FM, and then a big meteor comes through, and then all of a sudden the opening perks up. Like, I think that on a micro scale, there's some validity of, if we have a ionized patch of E-skip up, at like an 80 MUF or something, and then a meteor comes flying through and adds some juice, some juice to that E-skip, existing E-skip formation, then I do buy into that. But I don't feel like it's a systemic cause. I feel like it's just something that can help boost an existing opening. But that's just my theory.
Oh, that's as logical as some of any theory I've heard, right? So it is, and there's a reason why there's the name Sporadic and Sporadic-y. And I'm kind of like you, like I do want to have a good understanding of it, but I also do like the mystery of it. And with Tropo, we kind of have a heads up, right? We know Tropo is coming, and so we can be ready for it. But there is something about that thrill, like when we had. At the end of April, we had our little openings we had here down in New Mexico. Man, that flutter, that feeling in your chest, we're like, there's E's. Oh, here we go. I would feel like that would not be as much when you look and you say, if you knew, okay, tomorrow we're going to have some E openings in, the Northeast or whatever, right? So I do like that mystery. Speaking of Tropo, I do want to ask one other question that Les, who's a big fan of the podcast, right? You guys talk about the DFOA? Or DFOP? DFOP, that's what it is.
That's right.
The DFOP, Les Rayburn there in Alabama, big proponent of the podcast. He's the one who actually introduced me to you guys as well. Wants to know if you guys would be covering Weather DX. We talk about 6 meter as an early alert for E-skip. Weather DX as an early alert for FM Tropo is also a thing as well. Is that something you guys have contemplated covering?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does. What Les is great about is if he catches wind of an NWR station going off the air. Oh, right. For example, I'm in the Mount Holly, New Jersey CWA, and there's a scheduled outage coming up later in May. I'm sure Les is on top of. It absolutely can be a fantastic propagation indicator. It helps to know your NWR dial, whether it's 162.525. But that is a subject we haven't covered too much, and maybe not at all, to be honest. So absolutely, I think, and from a tropospheric perspective, 100%. And I think as a few of us would attest to, the memorable E-skip openings, July 24th, 2012. There's been, there's usually, you may not be in the spot for them, but there's usually in a decent season, 1 or 2 where the MUF will actually reach 162 megahertz, and that's pretty special. So in terms of a pretty easily identifiable propagation indicator, there's no question. No other weather radio works out pretty well. So that we can certainly do some coverage.
I want to say we had a conversation, or that was part of our talk with Bill Hepburn. We did a little bit of NOAA weather radio talk, and he's actually turned my attention to, there's a few pretty good Canadian, I think in the marine, there's a marine band on the Canadian side that does like marine information, in Nova Scotia also in that frequency range. So it's a fascinating, high VHF range for DXing. And I think it adds some rarity. In the summertime at FM, E-skip can become pretty common in a good season. So it's always fun to have like a still analog place to look above FM. So I would say, I know Nick and I have discussed dedicating an episode or bringing a guest on or back on with more of a focus on weather radio. So stay tuned. It's a really good topic idea.
Yeah, I have noticed there have been here on the Gulf Coast multiple Tropo events. You'll see the APRS map, the 2-meter ham radio map, and there's the big blobs, the red blobs that says that you should be getting some Tropo. You look on FM and you're like, not really. But then you go look up on the NOAA band, and man, there's stuff, right? Like I'm hearing Galveston, I'm hearing Houston, I'm hearing into San Antonio. Like there is what I was looking for. So it can definitely be either an early warning that Tropo is heading down towards FM, or if it never makes it down, it's something to DX while you're kind of like, well, I don't have anything on the FM. Let me go play with some NOAA stuff.
It can be an antenna challenge, though. Like I got my hands on a marine band antenna that, like a log periodic that I have mounted vertically, but of course, vertical polarization on your rotator with a metal mast in between can distort the pattern. Like, I don't know. It's a challenging band from an antenna perspective, and I never have that antenna plugged in, so I'm quickly trying to plug in the FM Yagi, and its directionality isn't correct on the NOAA side. So that's the one challenge I always have with the NOAA band is remembering to tune there, and then can I get my antenna hooked up, and I don't know.
That's mine.
The one thing,
let me go check it out. I forgot NOAA's there.
I would mention too, I carry it around everywhere I go. Those Baofeng, the UV5R, I believe it is. I'll use it to, first of all, public safety channels. Yeah, sometimes those could actually be decent tropospheric indicators. If I hear, Long Island, if I know what fire dispatch channel, I know a lot of departments have gone digital. But you cover scanning, I think a pretty large degree. But the Baofeng portable is actually pretty sensitive just with the stock antenna, and it's $17 on Amazon. Pending tariffs, you can't beat it. So that I'll actually cover that. And if I'm walking the dog, you get best results outside, for a portable. It goes without saying. That's actually, I will carry that around. If I just want to do a tropo barometer with NOAA weather radio, it's pretty easy to hear code channel interference lingering under a local. And if my 162.475 from Philadelphia, if I hear some rumbling, almost a little akin to medium wave DXing, not quite, but with narrow band FM, it sort of has that effect. It might be Riverhead, Long Island, or it might be Salisbury, Maryland on 162.475. So if you're looking for a quick way, a cool portable, I do have a ham license, but I don't transmit with it. I just use it, for the VHF pager frequencies and for NWR, and I take it for granted, but it's actually a pretty decent propagation indicator. So I'll shout out that, and just because you mentioned it, just as a tool that I should have mentioned, the APRS map, the Mountain Lake map, that's been around for like 20 years now. I believe it's John Harder, NGOE. Unbelievable resource. In the small soapbox I have, it always does frustrate me. Not you, Lloyd, but when I see DXers at large, let's just say, cite the fact that what they see on the map doesn't match what they hear. And you have to understand that these stations might be, at an elevation, 1,100 feet up. It indicates real-time conditions that are possible, and it has proven dividends for me so many times. So I think it's an awesome resource to see real-time Tropo. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Oh, absolutely. Like it's the same kind of early warning for Tropo that you would get from E-skip from 6 meters, right? It's that conditions are kind of heading in that direction. You may want to have a plan in place to get your either your SDR or your radio, whatever it is, on. One more question for both of you. And what is we talked about tools and resources. Could be an SDR, could be an online resource, could be one particular antenna, whatever it is. What is the one indispensable thing that you have to have for FM DX? And I'll start with you, Bryce.
A resonant antenna would be my opinion. So not like, if you can, not the whip on the portable or your headphones on a portable, but if you can get your hands on just a plain old dipole, which I think is not too hard to build, or even get a pair of rabbit ears and adjust the whip antennas to the resonant lengths for FM, which, Google the good old quarter wave formula for ham antennas. I think a resonant antenna out in the clear, not indoors, is probably the best, most overlooked tool for FM DX out there. I've had so much luck over the years with just a plain, at that apartment I was talking about, I had the stock Sony XDR wire antenna, which is just a dipole scotch taped to a window. It's certainly better than nothing, and better than any like whip antenna that's going to come with your radio. And I've also had a tremendous amount of luck taking 2 portable whip antennas and putting them together in a dipole and then connecting it to one of those fiberglass push-up masts. I've had, super cool vacation, E-skip, meteor scatter. It makes all the difference in the world to have a proper resonant antenna.
You just reminded me of one more question I'll ask of you, Bryce, because you talk about it in one of your videos around SDR console, meteor scatter. We have a lot of folks in the chat. We've talked about meteor scatter quite a bit here on the live stream. E-skip is E-skip. If it's in, it's in, right? And you want to minimize your noise as much as possible, but E-skip can overcome a lot of things, and noise is one of those it can a lot of times overcome. Tropo is Tropo. It's a little more weak signal on Tropo in a lot of cases, but if you get a good strong opening, you're going to have some DX. Meteor scatter, though, you have to have a low noise floor, and you have to have some patience. Real quick, some of the techniques on meteor scatter that you subscribe to.
Yeah, all day long. I think you talked about that SDR console series I did last year, which I had a lot of fun with. I want to say the final episode is that data file analyzer in SDR console. That's been probably, there was a period when I, first moved here. I have this just very fortunate to have this property here with all this open space. And to the southwest, I'm in Cape Cod, which is like about the farthest east you can go in the continental U.S. Maybe some parts of Maine. But so everything, all the stations are to the southwest for meteor scatter pretty much. So I would point in that direction, even when there's no meteor showers going on at all, into a quiet area, record overnight. I use the AirSpy HF Plus, which just has basically 3 or maybe 4 FM channels at a time it can record. So I just find 1 or 2 open frequencies, or open-ish, even if there's kind of like a weak semi-local off the back. You'd be surprised at what you can hear if you record that small swath into quiet area, and then load it back in the SDR console data file analyzer and just scroll through and look for big bumps of signals and click on those. And then there's a technique that I think we discussed like during that COVID time called beating up the RDS ID, which I might cover in that video, which is basically you're in the IQ recording, just click on the spot and play the same 3-second meteor burst over and over and over again. Do it about 10 times and look at that little spectrum scope where you can see the RDS sidebands. And if you see anything there, just kind of play it over and over again, and you'll probably get an RDS ID. So I don't know, I got hundreds of meteor scatter IDs from just doing that. But again, it requires the right environment, and my environment is not perfect, but it probably is, it'd be really hard to do in like a noisy urban location or with really, really big. I have a 50,000 watt station about 8 miles from here, so I don't have the best RF environment, but there's, a nice, open, quiet area of terrain nearby that I credit to any success that I've had in meteor scatter. But I bet going out to like a beach or a wildlife area or something early in the morning, portable with a dipole antenna, just record it out in the quiet for like an hour and play it back. And, there could be some fun DXing to do with meteor scatter, in my opinion, in that kind of format.
I can vouch, guys, after watching Bryce's videos on the topic, the data file analyzer and that kind of thing, I went from 5 meteor scatter logs, which were all auto logs, by the way, on my rabbit ears map, went from 5 to I've got 75. So just using his techniques added 70 new stations in my logbook. So I can definitely vouch and talk about how great that, just looping that one little section of the burst is over and over, right in the strongest part. Just keep looping it over. And I've had quite a few RDS decodes come in that way that I never would have gotten if I just had listened to it once and said, there's nothing there, and moved on.
Yep, and you also get to learn a lot about RDS. Like I learned during that time that, not every station's RDS transmits like one, like the other. There are some stations that they can control the injection level, it's kind of a nerdy topic, of their RDS carrier. So some stations will crank that way, way, way up, so you'll barely hear any signal from the audio, and you'll see the RDS PI code start to decode. So after you use that technique for about 10 or 15 nights in a row, you'll start to see that it's like the same stations over and over and over again that have the big signals and a pretty well injected RDS carrier on their station. And that's why it can get, I hate to say it, but it can get a little boring night after night to hear the same stations over and over. But if you have some free time and you're willing to go through the files, you can dig out a lot of stuff.
And during a good meteor shower, we just had Lyrids. Perseids are a really great one. I did a lot of what I have, that 75 came from that meteor shower last year, the Perseids meteor shower. So definitely give it a shot. Try to minimize your noise as much as you possibly can, as Bryce was mentioning, and you can have some fun with meteor scatter as well. Nick, to you, my friend, that one indispensable thing you have to have for FM DX, other than like a radio, like what's the most indispensable thing for you?
Well, I'll cheat and give you 2 quick things. The first thing is kind of a soft thing. That would be patience. I feel like we see it a lot, even in like the good seasons. It'll be like the 2-week, I think it's, more than colloquially known as like the mid-June lull. I don't know if that'll factor in your data set, Lloyd. We'll have, you can fact check me on that. But I remember a comment, I think it was from Rick Shafton on one of the old WTFDA email lists. And he said something to the effect of, there's only like 20 days a year or so where actual FM DX happens. And I remember thinking, oh, that's crazy. There's way more than that. And maybe that was in the era where, tropo scatter was more of a thing, where that, it's a lot harder to come by with the way the band is. So the hobby is not for the faint of heart. And so there are even in 2021, there were probably some stretches, where activity was not cranking. it's understandable to, I definitely used to pull my hair out, when those stretches happened. Last season, it was understandable. If it boiled over, it's good to express the emotions, but just have patience. Because I think when you do, and if you stick around, and when the DX does happen, and particularly the special openings, because there's only so many times here you can hear Florida. Another cool thing in your data set, like it identified, I think, Massachusetts to Florida, Bryce, as like the number one path. That's, which is, that is on the nose. So patience. And I think sort of building off what Bryce said, like noise floor is just like everything. I feel like I've also revitalized my DX a little bit, including meteor scatter, with the combination of paying attention to noise floor through the gifts that are SDRs. But I've also learned that higher is not always better when it comes to Yagis. Again, maybe 30 years ago, if you could get that 13 element up to 40 feet, go for it. Now you're just amplifying the crap. And so I have had success with a couple of Innov antennas and then the SBFM9, keeping it 9 feet off the ground on a tripod, and hearing, it has revitalized meteor scatter in southern New Jersey for me a little bit. That also diversity mode is a big part of that. So pay attention to the noise floor. In relation to that, don't discount, if you can't get your antenna up high, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, that could be a good thing.
Could be. It's interesting. I've been toying with that. I just took my Stereo Probe 9, the vintage one that I got from Les Rayburn. It's been sitting about 15 feet. Took it from my ELAD and put it in the backyard on my RSP Duo. Replaced that with a 4-element Innov antennas log periodic. And there are definitely some differences. I think that's more the design of a log versus a Yagi. But I've noticed I have my omnidirectional wine guard up at 62 feet up in a tree. I just hoisted it up with a air cannon thing and put it up in a tree. And I have a center fire dipole sitting at 21 feet. There are many times when the center fire dipole sees stuff that the 62 footer never sees on my autologger's map. So that validation, right? Proof of concept.
That goes right in. That's definitely.
Do you? I mean, other than those one-off scenarios, do you like having that antenna at 60 feet? I've actually been considering doing the same thing. I have a pretty tall pine tree, and I have one of those Omni loops, and I'm like, I wonder if I should just toss a rock up in the tree and put it way up there.
There are times when it also does see things that the 21 foot will not, right? So there is some vice versa. It seems to happen a little bit more with the dipole seeing stuff, at least here lately, that the 62 footer hasn't. But I've also noticed on E's that 62 footer is just dynamite. So I have I can never remember his call sign. N4RLO or NR4LO Airboss. It's just PVC cannon, and you can fill it with like a bike pump, and you can fill it with air, and then you have a fishing reel with a bit of fishing line and a fishing weight, like a 1 pound fishing weight, and you just shoot it up whichever limb you want to put it over, and it comes back down, bit of rope to come back around the other side, and that's what you use to hoist up your antenna. And it works really well.
I caught it's called an arborist.
Yes.
I don't know if it's called a throw bag or something like that. And that is it's super fun. I had to practice with it a little while, and I was afraid it was going to get like tangled up, but it's actually way better than the old rock method. So yeah, I mean, short of the air cannon, that sounds super cool, but the arborist throw bag is also another good one.
I know Thomas Witherspoon does the SWLing post. He's a big believer because he does like a lot of like QRP and like wire antennas on portable operations. He uses the arborist bag a lot and has a lot of success with it. So I've been wanting to try that myself. So we'll have to try that because I do have some more antennas. Believe it or not, I have some more antennas I still want to put up. The most recent I just actually got, because I have a headless TEF on the way from Romania, and they have the antenna switch where you can do between two antennas on the FM DX web server. So I have on there, I'm splitting off my 9-element Yagi onto there as one antenna input. And the other, I saw a lot of these guys in Europe using these S antennas. It looks like one of those round omnidirectional dipoles that's been kind of folded around. But in this one, they've kind of like the trombone slide. They just kind of put it into an S configuration. And so there's a little bit of horizontal, a little bit of vertical into it. And a lot of the guys in Europe swear by it. So I'm going to try it out and see how it works. So we'll see.
That's very cool. So you're saying that this you can do an antenna A and B on this TEF, and that it's on the web server. It's selectable between directions.
It is,
or between the two antenna ports. That's cool.
It is. When you change the antennas, it changes it for everyone. So everyone will also hear the same change. But yeah, you can put two antennas. It's the headless TEF. So instead of the portable or this guy. It's basically it plugs in with a USB cable into your computer, and then you have your two antenna inputs, and it acts almost like an SDR without the recording. So I'm looking forward to trying it out. It should be here hopefully soon, hopefully very soon. All right, the VHF DX Podcast, all the places you get podcasts, Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts, you'll find it. We talked about RadioWorld.com, Nick's columns that he writes for them. Make sure you check that out. Check out Bryce's videos on SDR console. I promise you will learn something if you have not watched them yet. Even if you've watched them, go back and watch them again. You probably missed something. I've found that myself. And then also check out WLogger through the WTFDA. Check out our video series we just did. We had just recently a video on WLogger on how to use that and how helpful it can be during an opening. Guys, I can't believe it. We've burned through 2 hours here almost. It doesn't feel like it, but it's been a fantastic conversation. And really appreciate having you guys here on our season finale of the live stream. Final thoughts, Nick, anything you want to leave with us from your side? I have to put you on the spot.
No, look, thanks for having us on. It's when you're, when you start getting going on FM DX, like that, you get in the flow state. So as they call it in coding. So no, it was great to be here. Thank you for having us on. And it feels kind of like a summer night here in Jersey. It's in the 70s, a little humid. Bring on the DX.
It's coming. It's coming. Bryce, anything from your side? Any final thoughts?
No, thank you for having me on, and Nick, and it's been great to be here with the audience. I guess the one thing I'll tease and say, we have the podcast episode coming out soon, and then I am also working on finally getting I had a lightning strike that ate my laptop that I was using for my rabbit ears autologger. So thanks to Les, who I don't know if he's here, but he got me hooked up with the TEF autologger. So I do have that working. I'm trying to dial in RDS. That doesn't seem to quite have the RDS sensitivity, but I also have a second TEF that I stocked before potential tariffs, and I'm going to try to get that online in the fmdx.org server space. So if anyone's interested in the Cape Cod DX environment, I'm going to get that going. And at least for some of the season, I plan to have it hooked up to the antenna looking south toward the Caribbean or Northeast. So if anybody wants to do my transatlantic DX search for me, be my guest.
After that Bermuda opening, we were all listening in to the East Coast of the U.S. from Bermuda. It was so much fun. So you'll have people take you up on that offer. I promise you that. And this one, I just snuck in right before the tariffs hit, because now it's $160 for one of these.
Yeah, I got one on Amazon for $85 last weekend. So probably got the last one.
There you go. Guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. Feel free to stay and hang out and watch the rest of the live stream. We're going to talk about our data analysis. We're going to talk about our Summer of DX challenge, which I'll go ahead and say now. We're going to put FM in there, and we're going to be doing some FM stuff that I don't know if anyone's ever done before from a challenge/award standpoint. So I'd love to have you guys be part of that as well. So we'll be talking about that here in a few moments. But again, thank you so much for being part of the fun.
Cheers. Bye.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right. That's Nick Langan and Bryce Foster from the VHF DX podcast, and just outstanding DXers, very knowledgeable, very Just big names in the DX community. So glad that we could bring them to you guys.
This has been the DX Central from the Static Podcast. If you are interested in sponsoring this podcast, let us know by emailing sponsors@fromthestatic.net. If you have a story to share for our Stories from the Static series, send those to our email address, stories@fromthestatic.net. Be sure to join us for our live DX live stream every Friday night at 23:45 UTC, 18:45 Central Time on our YouTube channel or at dxcentrallive.com.
The DX Central from the Static podcast is copyright 2025, Lloyd Van Horn, DX Central. All rights reserved. No portion of this podcast may be rebroadcast or reused without the express written authorization of Lloyd Van Horn and DX Central. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as new episodes will be posted regularly. Join us next time for the DX Central from the Static podcast.